Hi there, I'm Alex, a co-op at Voiceflow, and today I'm going to be walking through using your first Voiceflow API by building a simple Python interface to chat with your agent. This video will be a follow-along version of a Getting Started with APIs guide that you can find in our Voiceflow docs. It'll be primarily taught in Python, but a lot of the lessons being explained here are applicable in multiple different languages. In the written guides, there's also examples in JavaScript with Node.js that you can use to follow along, and all the code for this project in a finished form can be found on a GitHub in the description below. You'll definitely also want to go there to check out the 2 Voiceflow project templates we'll need to follow along in this tutorial. In this video, you will learn how to get your Voiceflow project API key, how to use the Dialog Manager API, including how to send requests to the Voiceflow APIs, how to start a conversation, how to parse the output traces you receive, how to send user replies, as well as how to deal with other kinds of traces, like buttons, end, and other types of things. We'll also quickly cover some of the transcripts APIs and examples more broadly on how you can learn how to use our other APIs, going through the case study of looking how to save our transcripts for our conversations. Okay, let's get straight into it. The first thing you need to do is make sure you've installed Python on your operating system, and then we want to create a new file called voiceflowapi-guide.py. This will be the main file we're using for the entire guide, and you can open it in whatever code editor you want. Here I'm using Visual Studio Code. So the first thing we'll do is import the requests library. It's what we'll be using to send API requests back and forth between our app and Voiceflow. So import requests. Next up, we're going to be importing the templates to our Voiceflow account. So in the documentation and in the description below, there's a link to this GitHub repo where you can click on a link and get this Voiceflow API Getting Started Part 1.vf file. In the top right corner, simply click Download Raw File. This will save it to your computer. And then from inside the Voiceflow creator, you can import it with this button in the top right. So if I go here, and then to my downloads, I can import it in, and boom, here it is. We can open it in the designer. So this is a pretty basic project. It's just a loop that's counting how many times and echoing back the user input. But it's what I often use for testing these kinds of API integration, so I recommend we follow along with it now. The first thing we need to do is run the project, so it's in the development mode. If you just click run here, and then answer one time, how's it going? It will just echo back, and now we've run it once, and the next thing we need to do is publish the project. So in the top right-hand corner, we can click publish. No need to set a name for the publishing version, and just click publish. This will create a version that we can interact with through the API. It's important to publish the agent like this because otherwise every single request we'll send, we're just going to receive back an empty array and it's going to be really confusing to debug. Okay, we're already done that first part, now onto part 2. Let's see how we can get our Voiceflow API key. What we need to do is from in here, we can go to the Integrations tab and then API key, and we can click Copy API key. And once we have the API key, all we need to do is put it in, so API key equals, and then paste it in. And boom, that's step 2 done. Next up is the Dialog Manager API. This is the Voiceflow API we use to interact with the conversational part of our agent. So having a discussion back and forth, sending text messages, getting answers back, buttons, images, all that jazz. And the most important of those is the interact endpoint. It's where we send our request and get back an answer from Voiceflow. So to wrap that one, we're going to write a function in Python. So def interact, and it's going to take a user ID and a request that we're going to be sending to Voiceflow. So user ID request. Now what we're going to add into this function is a line of code that we're going to use to actually send the request to Voiceflow. So I've just copied it from the docs here, and you can find it online. But this is sending a post request to Voiceflow, and the URL we're requesting is this Dialog Manager API. We're specifying the user ID, so which conversation we want to talk with, and the interact endpoint. In there, we're going to include the request, which is that payload we're sending to Voiceflow, which will say either we're launching the conversation, here's the text input the user gave, or here's whatever action they did. And then the last thing that's really important here is the authorization and the version ID. The authorization is our API key, so that's how we identify which conversation we're talking to. And the version ID will actually specify which version we're using. So here we're using a version alias, so not actually giving a full version ID, we're just giving something that says production. So that's the one, when we click publish online, it sort of stores a snapshot of our agent so that if we want to make any changes, those aren't instantly reflected in our deployed version. To push them to production, we've got to click publish. And then after this, just to see if it's working, we will print the response. So print response.json. And this just prints the response that our Voiceflow API will send back. So just to run one test, we're going to set up some really basic code. We're going to get the user's name and use that as their user ID, and then we're going to send a launch request. So to get the user's ID, you have to just do name equals input, and then we're going to write what's your name. And then to send the request, we're going to use interact, that function we just wrote, and we're going to pass in the name as a user ID, and as the payload, we're going to put type as launch. So this just tells Voiceflow, hey, we want to start a new conversation. And now we should be ready to run our program. So then if we just pull up our terminal and run python 3 voiceflow API guide.py, it will ask us our name. So I type in my name is Alex, and here we saw it sent a request to Voiceflow. It replied, hi there, Python, and we can actually see that this replicates exactly what's inside our Voiceflow project. So if we go here, it says, hi there, Python. Let's say we want to update it. So hi there, Python 2, and we'll put 2 exclamation marks. And then we click publish. So now having published this version, if we run the script again, test, we'll see the answer has our new reflected update. So boom, we have our first connection for Voiceflow API. So obviously when you're having a discussion with somebody, you're not answering back and forth in big piles of JSON and code like we have here. We want to be able to get back those messages that Voiceflow is outputting. That's because here, the replies from the Dialog Manager API are returned in what's called an array of traces. Traces is just Voiceflow's concept of everything that your agent can output. And then we need to parse these outputs to be able to display them properly. So that could be as simple as just rendering the text that we get back, but as complicated as showing images, carousels, buttons, and all that jazz. So to deal with these traces and get a better output, instead of just printing the output JSON, we're actually going to do a for loop. So for trace in response.json will iterate over every single one of the traces in this array. Here there's 2 where it says hi there Python and then echoing. So for each of these traces, we're going to check if the trace is a message trace. So if trace, if the type of the trace is a text message, then we're just going to print its output. And as we can see here, if we look at the traces, we have type equals text, and then the message is stored in here in a variable called message. So we're going to do print trace its payload, which is the actual contents, and then message. And now if we run this new code, mangoes, boom, we can actually see the output from our conversation. So wow, we have our first working readable output. Now, this isn't so much of a conversation as I'm asking Voiceflow something and it's giving me one answer back. So let's figure out how we can have a conversation going back and forth. So to have a conversation going back and forth, we're just going to make a loop that runs forever and just gets an input from the user and sends an answer to Voiceflow and goes back and forth printing the output. So all we're going to do for this is a loop while true, which means it's never going to stop running. We're going to get user input, so next input equals input, and then say something. We'll put a \n on these so that it prints nicer. And then we're going to pass that input to Voiceflow with a request. So we're going to say interact. Again, the same user ID so that we have the same conversation. And then we're going to send a different type of request. Above, we sent a launch request because we were starting the conversation anew, but we don't want to be starting the conversation over each time we send an interaction. So now we're going to send a text payload. So that's going to be type is text. And then for text interactions, we're going to set the type equals to text, and then we're going to pass a payload. So the payload is actually going to be the user's message. So next input is the answer. And then if we just run this again, you should be able to see my name is Alex. 1. Okay, how's it going? And we can see Voiceflow answering here, echo 1, how's it going? Blah, blah, blah. It's answering it back, and boom, we're able to have a conversation back and forth with our Voiceflow agent. Just for fun, let's try adding some AI in here, and I'll show you how fast it is in Voiceflow. So we can go here, AI step, response AI, and then we can just get the AI to respond. So tell a funny joke based on last utterance. You can just publish this new version, and the new version is successfully published. And if we just stop our script and start it again, make sure when you're testing between different versions, you want to use different user IDs. So let's just put in some random numbers. I love mangoes. And we can see how easy it is to get interactions with large language models like ChatGPT through Voiceflow, and we can see how little code was required here to interact with the Voiceflow APIs. Okay, now we're going to deal with a slightly more complex Voiceflow agent other than just a loop that echoes back exactly what I said. So for this, we're going to need to download a new template. It's in the description below and in the documentation here. If you click import second project example, we can download it again, top right, and then from Voiceflow, just leave your project, go back to your dashboard, import this part2 file, and boom, it should be added, and now you can open it up inside Voiceflow. Again, we'll have to do the same process to run it and publish it, so let's just go in here. I like pink. And then it's run once, we should be good now, and we can just click publish in the top right, publishing a new version to the public web. And then now we're going to get our API key so that we can interact with it. So again, interactions, copy API key, and then let's go back to our Python script and paste it in. So we save our file, and now we can run some new code, blah, blah. And then boom, it's asking us our new favorite color. So we have the second example loaded, but let's have a quick conversation with it. Favorite color is, let's say, orange. Would you prefer an orange hat or an orange t-shirt? Let's say a t-shirt. Didn't work. That's because it actually didn't even show me the buttons. If you look at the Voiceflow example here in the workflow, it's actually supposed to serve me some options for hat, shirt. But here, because those buttons weren't displayed, I just went down the no match trace and then just ended the conversation early. So let's figure out how we can display those buttons. So the issue here is that the buttons were never actually displayed in my text console here, and we never knew that they even came because there was nothing printed in our Python terminal. What we'll actually do now is add a quick else condition that is often useful when you're writing these kinds of custom interfaces to know which traces your program is not dealing with. So here we're just, for now, dealing with text traces. So let's see what else is coming through. So what we're going to do here is add an else condition to see all the traces that we're not handling other than text. So if you do else, print, unhandled trace, and then we're just going to put the trace. We're just going to paste it in. And now if we stop the code and run it again, blah, blah, orange, we can actually see there's an unhandled trace here for a path switch. You don't need to worry about that. That's just Voiceflow telling us which direction we're going. But there's also an unhandled trace of type choice. And in here, we can actually see the options for our buttons. So hat, shirt, neither. So that's what we're going to want to render. So now that we know it's here, let's add some code to actually handle the buttons. So the way buttons are dealt with is that whenever you click the button, you have to send back a certain answer that Voiceflow expects. So here we can see this action in here under request, and then it says type equals path and then this random string. So what we're going to do is whenever we receive buttons, we're going to store them and then send them back to Voiceflow. So the first thing we're going to do is make an array of all the buttons that our code currently has. So buttons equals an empty array. Then we're going to deal with if we have a trace, so elif, so this is the other condition, trace type is choice. So choice is the name of the button trace. It's a little bit complicated, but you can find this all in the Voiceflow docs. We're going to set the buttons to the actual payload. So equals trace payload buttons. And then we're going to print the options we get to choose from. So print, choose one of the following. And then we're going to print each of these options and then use them later to actually figure out what button the user wants to click. Obviously here there's no button interface in Python. If we had a GUI, we could do that. But we're just going to present a list of options. So choose one of the following, and then we're going to print all the options. So for I in range len buttons. This is just looping through all the buttons and printing their index. So print, and then we're going to do f-string, which is just a way of formatting text, and then I+1 so that we start at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we're going to put the button's name. So buttons, this is the ith button, so as we iterate through the list, and then the name. This is maybe a little bit of complicated code for new beginner programmers, but this is basic Python to loop through an array and then print the index and take an item from the array and print its name here. So once we did it, we can save our code. I actually made a little mistake in here. There should be single quotes because otherwise it's going to break the interpretation of the string. But if we just save it and run the code again, and we type test blah, mango, it's now presenting the 3 options for the buttons, just like in the actual Voiceflow agent. But now, if I want to actually input the 1, so let's say I say 1, it's just not going to know that I wanted to do the hat, and it's just going to, again, go down this no match path. So we need a way to understand if we have buttons to actually send those requests instead of interpreting our answer from our user as basic text. So we're actually going to deal with the cases where there's buttons or no buttons differently. So if there are buttons, so length of the array of buttons is more than 0, then we're going to deal with the buttons, and otherwise we're going to deal with it just as normal text. So now we're going to have some input code to get the actual selection from the user. So button selection equals input, and then we're going to say choose a button number or just send a reply. And then we're going to get their user input, and we're going to store that in a variable called button selection. And then here we're going to have a try catch. So that's just, we're going to try to see if it's a correct number, then we'll send it. If it isn't, then we'll just interpret it as normal text. Imagine they said, like, instead of answering like one of the button selections, they just gave an input that's like, oh, I want whatever. We actually do this time want it to go down this no match path correctly. So we're going to try to see if it fits in. So we're going to do interact, again with the same user ID, so it's the same conversation thread name. And now we're going to send a different kind of payload. Instead of actually sending a text or a launch request, we're just going to send the answer that the button is telling us to. So we're going to go to buttons. We're going to take the integer number of the button selection. So that's just converting the string of, like, if they type letter 1, it'll convert into the number 1. And then because we're zero index in programming, we're going to subtract 1. So we're going to take the button that they chose, and then it'll send its request. So that is just request. So in case something goes wrong, imagine it's not convertible, we're just going to put an exception, and then we're going to interact like it's normal text. So interact, name. We can actually just copy off the code from down here. But instead of next user input, we're going to do button selection. What I actually forgot to do up here is set the buttons to global. This is just a Python thing where if you're updating variables from inside a function, you need it to be global externally. But if we run it again, it should work now. Alex9, purple, and boom, now you have our 3 options showed up, and we see this custom text for choose a button number. So let's say we want a shirt, we'll put in 2, click enter, and wow, I think it worked. It says, okay, let's get a purple shirt. Here's an example. And it went down this correct path right here. This is an orange, obviously. But we also see a different type of trace, visual. Turns out that this visual trace is actually the image here. We see the image, and then we have the link to the actual image itself online. So I haven't implemented this in this code right here, but as a challenge, I encourage you guys to try and make a way of rendering the visual payloads from Voiceflow in Python. So you could use things like some image libraries or matplotlib, but give it a try and make sure to comment in the video description below if you got that challenge done. Okay, so it's super that we got the buttons working now, but I also see one last trace that says end, and this is a bit weird. Imagine I want to give a reply to my Voiceflow agent here and said, like, can I get the shirt? It's actually just starting the conversation over again. That's because when a Voiceflow conversation ends, it sort of stops it, and then if you send another request as if you were trying to continue it, it'll just imagine that was a launch request and then start from the start. So here we see, what's your favorite color? It's actually just forgetting that we passed here, and it's going straight back to start. That's because we hit this end, and we actually need our code to deal with the fact that the conversation ended. So we're going to add one last system, which is keeping track of whether the conversation is alive or dead. So to get whether the conversation is alive or dead, if the interaction ends normally, we're just going to return true, a Boolean. But if we hit a trace that says end, so elif trace type equals end, then if we have a trace that ends, we're just going to return false, so saying the conversation is no longer alive. And then we're going to store a variable is alive equal to this interact payload, and then we're only going to loop while it's alive. So while is alive, and then here we're going to, again, update is alive, and we're going to update is alive, and just last one here. Save this code, and if we run it again, Alex, this number, blue, I can choose a hat, and then boom, the conversation actually ended and the Python code escaped. So we can just put one last little print saying print conversation ended, and boom, now we have a fully fledged Python script to discuss with a Voiceflow agent through the Dialog Manager API. Great job. The last part of this guide is going to focus on how you can learn how to use Voiceflow's other APIs. And here we're going to go with an example of the transcripts API, but the lessons here will be applicable to every API we have to offer. So we're going to walk through how to use the docs, how to experiment, how to get the info we know, and then how to actually implement the code here in Python. So one maybe unintuitive thing about some of the stuff on Voiceflow is that whenever we have a conversation, there is this transcripts tab in here in our agent, but right now it's empty, even though we just had a bunch of conversations with it through our Python terminal. That's because transcripts have to be saved through the transcripts API. So let's figure out how we would do that. So if we go here to the API reference, and then we go to the transcripts endpoint, which is down here, we can actually look, there's a bunch of endpoints for transcripts. And we want to be creating a transcript, so it looks like we should go to this endpoint. Here we have our documentation, and the way you should look at this is I like reading this description real quick, and then switching it over to a code I'm familiar with. So here it's Python. There's code in a bunch of different languages, but here we're doing Python tutorial. So here we see we have to send it to api.voiceflow.com/transcripts. And then this documentation can actually be populated with some information. So let's just say project ID, version ID, session ID. So we see that here we have a payload we need to send along with it in the request. So we'll need to get our project ID, version ID, and session ID. And then we'll be able to send this request. So let's first of all try out doing it from just inside the docs here. We're just sending actual requests to our actual Voiceflow project. So first of all, let's get our API key. So if we go to integrations, we can copy our API key here, paste it in. Next, we're going to need our project ID and our version ID. This is useful to specify what's going on. So if you go to settings, scroll down, there's project ID. Let's copy it. And then let's get our version ID. Super. This version ID doesn't actually update every single time you publish, so it shouldn't be an issue. But if you are having issues, try making sure it's up to date. And then your session ID is actually just the user ID, like it describes here. So our user ID, let's find one from a past conversation. In the last conversation, I called myself Alex98123. So let's paste this in. And then if we click try it, it'll actually run the request on a real Voiceflow API. We see it succeeded, so it saved the session ID for Alex98123. And if you go back and look at our project and then go to the transcripts tab, boom, we can see that we saved our transcript. So here's the conversation we had, blue, hat, and that's actually exactly what I did here. Blue, and then I chose button 1, which is hat. So we see great success. Now all we have to do is implement the code that's from the docs here and put it into our Python project. Or for example, if you're doing a node, you would do this code, or just for general use case, you can see the basic curl request that we would be sending. So now we know how to do it, let's implement it in Python. So the first thing we'll need to do is we'll need to create variables for our project ID and version IDs. So if we go to the top here and we make new variables, project ID, make sure to store them as strings, version ID, and make sure to store this one too. Amazing. Okay, next up we're going to have to actually create a function that we can use to save the transcripts. So instead of, it's different to interact, so let's write a new function, def save transcript. And then we're just going to, all we need is a user ID to identify which transcript we're going to save. So user ID. And then if we actually go to this code here and copy paste it, we can paste it into our Python. Then we have the URL we need, and all we need to do is make sure we're taking in the right information. So instead of this hard-coded project ID, we're going to do project ID. We're going to do version ID here. And then we're going to take the user ID we just got in, so user ID. And then we also have to update the API key. So API key updated. Now it will do the put request. It will send the response. And then let's just check that it worked. So if response.OK, which is a variable that lets us know that it worked well. Whoops, no need for curly braces. We're just going to print saved transcript. Okay. And last thing we need to do is actually to run the save transcript function. If you try to save the same transcript twice, it'll just update it. So all we need to do is add this every time we send an interaction from the user. So let's say the user sent their input. We're just going to save the transcript here. Now if we run our code, mango boy. Let's say orange. I'm missing user ID. That's because here we forgot to put the name. My bad. Let's run it again. Mango boy 2, let's say yellow. And it saved the transcript, we see it printed it. So let's just check the transcripts tab right now. If we refresh, we see Mango Boy 2 said yellow, and then it gave the answer. And then let's say I want a shirt. It sent it, it saved the transcript again, and it entered the conversation. And now if we reload from here inside Voiceflow, we can see the updated version of the transcript, and then we can see that the conversation has finished here. This is super useful if you want in later to study the conversations that happened and mark as read, mark save for later. But also more generally, we just learned how we can do the process of adding a new API from Voiceflow using this interactive documentation, testing it out in here, and then copy pasting the code into our own functions and then adapting it. So here we needed to change some variables, but sometimes you might need to change a couple other things. But this lesson should really be helpful to you if you're looking to do other things like adding documents to your knowledge base, getting analytics, doing testing, or anything like that. So congratulations, you just finished the Getting Started with Voiceflow APIs guide. Hopefully you've gotten a good idea of how you can use Voiceflow's APIs to build custom interfaces or interact with your projects programmatically. I strongly encourage you to use your newfound skills to look at our demos and examples repository that's full of a bunch of projects built on these Voiceflow APIs that you can really use to inspire yourself. And then once you've looked at them, make your own creative custom interfaces, and then again post them in the comments or join our Voiceflow community on Discord and share them there. We really love to see what people are building with Voiceflow. If you're looking for even more resources, you can look at our YouTube that has a bunch of videos and guides and tutorials and discussions about building these kinds of custom interfaces around Voiceflow. And of course, I encourage you to take a good look around the new Voiceflow documentation that will really teach you everything you need to know from actually building the agent itself, so things like entities, intents, how to use LLM blocks, but also some research, best practices, how to deploy, and here you can use your newfound skills to build creative custom interfaces with the APIs. So go out there and build something great, and I'll see you around.